Hello everyone, Mr. Willis here, and today I want to talk to you about how to make a pinch pot. I want to walk you guys through all the things that you're going to need to do in order to be successful in this technique. Talk to you about some of the specific things you're going to need to do with your hands and some of the tools that you're going to need in order to be successful. So first of all, of course, you're going to need clay. And I would say when you're getting clay, you probably want to use somewhere around between golf ball and baseball sized piece of clay. So it doesn't have to be very big. Start a little bit small, something around here, something that can just fit in your hand is plenty for what we're going to be doing today. Make sure and wrap your clay back up so that it doesn't dry out. And you're going to need a piece of canvas. That's going to help a lot with preventing the clay from sticking to the work surface that you're working on. Have a little bit of water that you can use, and have some tools specifically for scoring the clay. So something that is kind of sharp or pointy. A pin tool works great, but if you don't have a pin tool, like a pointy kebab stick works great. A toothpick would work, a fork would work. Any of those things that have kind of like a pointy end that you can scratch the clay with will be really handy for this. Now, as I get my clay ready to go, one of the things that's important to remember is you're not working with a little tiny piece of clay. If you remember when you're a little kid playing with a piece of Play-Doh, you could take it, you could roll it in your hand back and forth like this, and you could actually make a really nice ball of clay out of that. But when you start to work with a larger piece of clay, your hands aren't quite big enough to make that ball perfectly round. And so when you start to work with a larger piece of clay, what you want to do is you actually want to take the clay and hit it back and forth in your hand like this. And as you do that, you can rotate the clay around in your hand. And if you're hitting it in between your two cupped hands, you're going to start to form your clay into that ball that you're looking for. Now, keep in mind, I'm not doing this. I'm not throwing it back and forth in my hands. That actually does nothing. What I need is the clay in one hand and to make contact with the other hand against my hand with the clay in between. That's going to force it into that ball form. And at first you can hit it pretty firm, but then as you get closer and closer to a ball of clay, you're going to get softer and softer until it's just like a gentle pat to get that last little bit formed. And this is an important step because the more you are perfectly round with your ball of clay, the more symmetrical your piece is going to be when you're done. So I have a good ball of clay formed. It's looking nice and round. Now, one of the things that you're gonna notice when you do this, if I hold this up close, you can see that there are some creases in my clay. That's always gonna happen a little bit. These creases aren't a huge deal, but they can sometimes, if you pinch the clay in a certain way and the crease is in the right spot, those can expand and turn into cracks. And so if we can smooth those out, that's helpful. Now, during this technique, we're not wanting to use a lot of water because we want our clay to not get super soft or lose its structure. So I'm just gonna use like a little bit of water, just a little drip on my finger to help smooth out these creases. And all the water is doing is it's helping so that my finger can slide across the clay a little bit easier. And it makes the process a little bit faster. You don't really even have to use water if you don't want to. I just find it's a little bit easier to do if you have just a touch of water on the clay. But once those are smoothed out, this is ready to go. And what I want to do next is I want to make the opening in the clay. Now, the opening in the clay is important, and it needs to be right in the middle of this ball of clay, and it needs to be nice and round. Now, I'm going to be making this hole with my thumb. Now, my thumb itself is not perfectly round. It's a little bit more oblong or oval shape in terms of the thickness and the width of my thumb. So, as I hold this, I'm going to hold this in my fingers like this. I'm going to place my thumb underneath, and then I'm going to use my fingers to press this clay onto my thumb. But as I'm doing that, I'm going to also be rotating the clay around my thumb so that the hole that I'm making is perfectly round. So I'm going to start to press this in, and then as I press it in, I'm going to start to rotate it with my fingers so that the hole that I'm making is perfectly round. Now, one of the things that is really important with all types of hand building is you want your thickness to be the right thickness. Now, typically in ceramics, we're shooting for about 1/4 of an inch. And one way to help out with that, you don't always have a ruler sitting right next to you, and it's hard to measure the thickness of like the bottom of a pinch pot with a ruler. You have to do it by feel. And so what you want to do is you want to shoot for something that's about the thickness of the end of your pinky, about right here. And so I refer to the thickness that we're shooting for as pinky thickness. If it feels about the thickness of the end of your pinky, then you're at the right thickness. And that's something that I want to shoot for. And so I am going to be pinching the clay with my fingers. And the way you pinch is very, very important. Typically when we think of pinching, we think of taking your fingers and pinching something with your fingertips, a really small surface area. We do not want to use our fingertips. What we want to use actually is this flat portion of our fingers right here, the inside portion. I want to keep my hand and my fingers completely closed so that I have almost like a big board that I can use to squeeze the clay. And so I'm not going to be pinching like this. I'm actually going to be pinching more like this. It's more like talking with a sock puppet. So I call this a sock puppet pinch technique. And this is going to give you much better results. Not only is it going to give you more control, but it's going to help keep the surface of your pinch pot nice and smooth. Otherwise, you're going to have a really bumpy surface if you're using your fingertips to pinch the clay. So I'm going to have my thumb on the inside. I'm going to have my fingers on the outside. And I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up as I'm pinching and rotating this clay. And I'm going to continue to pinch this clay until the clay at the bottom feels about that pinky thickness that I'm shooting for. Now, this is very similar if you've seen videos online or if you've ever used a pottery wheel. This is very similar to the pottery wheel technique. In fact, the idea for the pottery wheel has evolved from this idea right here, rotating the clay. And as it's rotating the clay, you thin it out at the bottom and you work your way up. It's the same process, we're just doing it with our hands instead of a pottery wheel that's spinning the clay. So I'm using my non-dominant hand, for me that's my left hand, and I'm spinning the clay with my left hand and I'm pinching the clay with my right hand. And as soon as that clay at the bottom feels like it is 1/4 of an inch at that pinky thickness, I'm gonna slowly work my way up the side of the walls. And because I'm using that flat portion of my hand instead of my fingertips, I'm able to control the thickness a lot better, and I'm able to control the smoothness of the surface of my clay a lot better. Now, one of the things that is a side effect of this is that motion is pinching over and over and over. You're gonna start to really feel it in your thumb muscles. If you are in excruciating pain while you're doing this because your thumb's cramping up, then you're doing it right. Nice job. Keep it up. Fight through the pain, cherish the pain. What I'm going to continue to do here is just work my way all the way up to the rim. Now, one of the things that can happen is depending on how dry your clay is getting, your clay can start to crack, because what we're doing is we're stretching this clay and stretching it out, and as it stretches out, if it has lost some of its moisture, it can start to crack. And so if you look at the top rim of your piece as you are pinching it, if you start to see little cracks form, this is where you want to add a little bit of water. Just again, take a little bit of water on your finger and smooth out any cracks that are forming. If you smooth them out while they're still small, it's not going to be a problem. But if you let them get bigger and bigger, at some point they're going to be so big, they're going to be very, very hard to fix. And so fix them while they're tiny, and then they won't be a problem for you. And then I'm just going to continue to pinch this clay. Until I have the whole thing pinky thickness, 1/4 of an inch. And I want to just go around with my hands and make sure that that thickness is the same all the way through. And if everything has gone according to plan, I should have a nice even thickness. The surface should be fairly smooth. The rim should be fairly even. And this gives me a nice pinch pot start that I can build on to add design, to add another pinch pot, or to add a foot to this piece. So hopefully this helps, but this gives you an idea of some of those basic techniques that you need to have a successful pinch pot. Thanks for listening. This is Mr. Willis. I'll talk to you later.